After the divorce, my husband threw me out without a cent. I went to use the old card my father had left me, but the banker turned pale and shouted, "Ma'am, quickly look at this." I was in shock when I discovered that my life was about to change forever. My name is Zara King, and at 32 years old, I stood shivering on the pavement of a sprawling Hamptons estate, rain soaking through my thin blouse. Just an hour ago, this was my home. Now my suitcase lay open in the mud, my clothes ruining in the storm, thrown there by the man I had supported for 7 years. Julian Thorne. The man who claimed to love me stood in the dry warmth of the doorway, his arm wrapped possessively around the waist of Chloe Kensington. Julian looked at me with the cold detachment of an investment banker cutting a losing stock. He did not look like the man I married. He looked like a stranger wearing a $3,000 cashmere sweater I had bought him for his birthday. "You need to leave, Zara," Julian said, his voice smooth and devoid of emotion. "The neighbors are starting to look, and you know how the Kensingtons feel about curb appeal." I reached for the door handle of my car, my only means of escape, but Julian stepped forward and snatched the keys from my trembling hand. Not so fast," he said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Read the fine print of the divorce decree my lawyers sent over this morning. The Mercedes is a company lease under the firm's name. Since you are no longer the wife of a partner, you are no longer insured. I cannot have you driving my liability." He dangled the keys in front of me before pocketing them. Beside him, Chloe swirled her glass of red wine, looking at me like I was a stray dog that had wandered onto her lawn. She was 26, blonde, and the heiress to the Kensington real estate fortune. She was everything Julian wanted to be associated with. "Oh, Julian, don't be so hard on her," Chloe drawled, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You told me her father was just a janitor at your bank for 40 years. She is probably used to walking and taking the bus. It is just a return to her natural habitat, right, Zara?" The insult landed harder than the rain. My father, Elijah King, had been a janitor at Sterling Bank. He had swept floors and emptied trash cans until his back bent and his hands calloused. He died 2 years ago with nothing to his name but a small pension and a strange, heavy black metal card he made me promise never to use unless I had absolutely no one left to turn to. I looked at Julian, waiting for him to defend my father, the man who had welcomed him into our home when Julian was just a junior analyst with ambition and debt. But Julian just laughed. "You are right, Chloe," he said, turning his back on me. "She is a survivor. She will figure it out. Goodbye, Zara. Don't come back." The heavy oak door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the wet evening air. The lock clicked, then the porch lights flickered off, plunging me into darkness. I stood there for a long moment, the rain mixing with the hot tears on my cheeks. I had no car. My phone service had been cut off 10 minutes ago because it was on Julian's family plan. I had $12 in cash in my wallet and that heavy, useless metal card my father left me. I began to walk. The nearest town was 5 miles away. Every step was a reminder of my stupidity. I had signed the prenup because I trusted him. I had let him handle the finances because he was the expert. I had stayed in the background, dimming my light so he could shine, believing we were a team. But as I walked through the storm, dragging my muddy suitcase, something inside me shifted. The grief began to harden into something else, something cold and sharp. Julian thought he had taken everything. He thought he had stripped me down to nothing but a janitor's daughter. He had no idea that the janitor's daughter was about to walk into his bank and turn his entire world upside down. I gripped the old metal card in my pocket. It felt warm against my freezing fingers. Lesson learned from this story is that you should never give up your financial independence or your power to anyone, no matter how much you love them. Trust is beautiful, but security is essential. Always keep a safety net that is yours and yours alone, because the only person who will always show up for you is you. If you want to see how Zara uses that card to bring Julian to his knees, like this video, and subscribe for part 2. The walk to Sterling Bank took 40 minutes in the rain. By the time I pushed through the heavy revolving doors, I looked less like a doctor's wife and more like a vagrant. My hair was plastered to my skull, my designer dress was stained with Hampton mud, and my suitcase dripped a puddle onto the pristine marble floor. The security guard, a man I had greeted by name for 5 years, stepped in front of me with his hand on his holster. "Ma'am, you cannot bring that luggage in here," he said, his eyes scanning me with zero recognition. "We have a dress code for the lobby. You need to leave." "I am Zara King," I said, my voice hoarse. "My husband is Julian Thorne. I just need to make a withdrawal." The guard hesitated, looking at the muddy tracks I had made. He waved me toward the teller at the far end, the one reserved for non-account holders and general inquiries. I dragged my suitcase over. The teller, a young woman named Bethany with perfectly manicured nails, looked at me over her glasses with undisguised disgust. "Name," she snapped, hovering her hand over the silent alarm button. "Zara Thorne, or Zara King. Account number 409. "I know the account," she interrupted, typing furiously. "Mr. Thorne flagged this account an hour ago. It is frozen pending legal review. You have a 0 withdrawal limit." "Next." "Please," I whispered, leaning against the counter for support. "I have $12. I just need enough for a train ticket to the city. Just $50. Please." Bethany laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that echoed in the quiet lobby. "This is Sterling Bank, honey, not a soup kitchen. If you do not leave, I am calling the police." I turned to go, the humiliation burning hotter than the cold rain on my skin. Then I remembered. My hand brushed against the heavy, cold metal in my pocket. My father's words came back to me, echoing from his deathbed. "When they lock every door, Zara, use the key." I turned back to the counter. "Wait," I said. "I have another card." I pulled out the object. It was black, made of heavy titanium, scratched and worn around the edges. It had no magnetic strip, no chip, no expiration date. Just a series of raised numbers and the name King engraved in block letters. Bethany looked at it and scoffed. "What is this, a library card from the 1950s? We do not take novelty items. Run it," I said, my voice trembling with a sudden strange authority. She rolled her eyes and picked up the card with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. She typed the numbers into her terminal, manually smirking the entire time. Suddenly her screen flashed red. A loud, piercing siren began to wail, not from the lobby but from the system itself. Her computer screen locked. "See what you did?" she shouted. "You crashed my system. Security!" Before the guard could grab me, the door to the executive offices burst open. Mr. Archibald, the branch manager, came running out. He was a man who usually only moved for 7-figure clients, a man who had looked through my father for years as if he were invisible. "Who entered that code?" Archibald yelled, his face pale and sweating. "It is this woman, sir." Bethany pointed at me accusingly. "She tried to use this fake piece of metal and—" Archibald snatched the card from her hand. He looked at the engraving. He looked at me. Then he did something that made the entire lobby go silent. He dropped to his knees. He didn't just bow. He physically collapsed to his knees on the marble floor, holding the card with both hands like a holy relic. "Code Black," he whispered into his lapel microphone. "Initiate Code Black immediately. Clear the floor." Sir Bethany stammered. "I said clear the floor!" Archibald roared, standing up and buttoning his jacket with trembling fingers. "Escort all clients out. Close the main shutters. Now." Within seconds, security was ushering confused millionaires out the side doors. The metal shutters rolled down over the windows, plunging the bank into a twilight gloom. Archibald turned to me, his arrogance replaced by a terrifying subservience. "Miss King," he said, his voice shaking, "please, forgive us. We did not know. We thought the family line had ended with Elijah." He gestured toward the massive steel door behind the teller cages, a door I had never seen opened. It was the private vault reserved for the bank's gold reserves. "Please follow me." I left my muddy suitcase in the middle of the floor and followed him. Bethany stood with her mouth open watching the woman she had tried to evict being led into the sanctum sanctorum. Inside the vault the air was cool and smelled of old paper. Archibald led me to a solitary safety deposit box in the center of the room. It was not a normal box, it was a pedestal. He placed the black card into a slot on the top. The pedestal hummed and opened. Inside lay a single leather-bound ledger and a screen that flickered to life. "Your father, Elijah King, was not a janitor," Miss King Archibald said softly, keeping his head lowered. "In 1963, when banks refused to lend to black business owners, your father organized a community fund. He built this bank from the basement of a church. But because of the laws, because of the danger, he put a white face in front. He hired my grandfather to be the face of Sterling Bank. But Elijah King kept the ownership. He kept 51%. I stared at him. My father. The man who came home smelling of bleach and floor wax. He chose to stay in the shadows to protect the capital. Archibald continued. He worked as a janitor to keep an eye on his investment without drawing attention. He watched everyone. He saw everything. And he set up a trust that would only activate when his heir presented the founder's key. The screen beeped. A number appeared in bright green digits. Archibald looked at the screen and swallowed hard. "The trust has been accumulating interest and dividends for 40 years, Miss King. The current liquid balance available to you immediately is $85 million. He paused, then added the final blow. "And as the holder of the founder's key, you possess the ultimate veto power over all board decisions, including loan approvals, asset seizures, and personnel employment. You don't just have money, Miss King, you own this bank." I looked at the screen. $85 million. Enough to buy Julian's life 10 times over. I looked at the old leather ledger. On the first page in my father's handwriting, it read, "For Zara. So she never has to bow to anyone." I touched the paper, feeling the tears come again, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of power. "Mr. Archibald," I said, my voice steady and cold as the steel walls around us. "Yes, ma'am. Pull up the loan application for Julian Thorne. I believe he is requesting capital for his new wife's business venture." Archibald tapped on a tablet. "Yes, ma'am. It is pending final approval today." "Cancel it," I said. And Archibald, "Yes, ma'am. Get me a dry towel. And call the best divorce lawyer in New York. Tell them the owner of Sterling Bank is ready to go to war." Mr. Archibald ushered me into the private executive suite on the top floor, a space usually reserved for visiting dignitaries and billionaire investors. The view from here was breathtaking, a sprawling panorama of the city skyline that Julian had always claimed he owned. Now I realized he was just a tenant, and I was the landlord. Archibald offered to call a personal shopper from Fifth Avenue to replace my ruined clothes, but I shook my head. I did not want to dress up like a doll anymore. I wanted armor. I told him I did not need a stylist, I needed a legal team that could smell blood in the water and a security detail that would make the Secret Service look lax. Within 20 minutes, 3 men in dark suits and a woman with eyes like flint entered the room. This was the bank's internal counsel and head of security. They did not ask why a woman in a muddy dress was sitting in the chairman's leather chair. They simply waited for orders. I placed my father's ledger on the mahogany desk and opened the digital files Archibald had prepared. "I want to see everything," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the vast room. "Pull up the complete financial history of Julian Thorne." The screen on the wall flickered to life, displaying a web of accounts, transactions, and loans. What I saw made me gasp. On the surface, Julian projected the image of a golden boy, a partner bringing in millions. But underneath, the red ink was bleeding everywhere. He was leveraged to the hilt. His penthouse was mortgaged 3 times over. His luxury cars were leased on credit he did not have. And there was something else, a series of large, unauthorized withdrawals from client escrow accounts labeled as consulting fees. He was not just broke, he was a criminal. He was embezzling money to fund his lifestyle with Chloe, trying to keep up with the Kensington fortune until the wedding could save him. Just as I was absorbing the magnitude of his fraud, the phone Archibald had placed on the desk buzzed. It was my old number ported over to a secure satellite device. The caller ID flashed husband. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb hovering over the green button. Then I answered, putting it on speaker so the room could hear. Zara. Julian's voice came through, tinny and arrogant. I am just calling to check if you found a nice cardboard box to sleep in tonight. The storm is getting pretty bad out there. I hope you are not ruining those shoes I bought you. I sat back in the leather chair watching the live feed of his bank account on the screen in front of me. I could see a transaction pending for a $50,000 deposit to a wedding planner. I gestured to Archibald, who nodded and tapped a key. The transaction turned red and read declined. Julian paused on the other end of the line. Hello, he said, sounding annoyed. Are you there, Zara, or did your phone die like your marriage? I am here, Julian, I said softly. Good, he replied. I just wanted to remind you that the locks have been changed, so do not try to crawl back. And Zara, do yourself a favor and do not embarrass me by begging my friends for money. You are on your own now. He hung up laughing. The room was silent. The head of security looked at me, waiting. Shall we flag his accounts for fraud immediately, ma'am? The lawyer asked. I looked at the screen where Julian's financial life hung by a thread. No, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. Not yet. Let him think he is winning. Let him plan the wedding. Let him invite the Kensingtons. I want him to climb as high as possible so the fall will shatter him completely. Keep his credit line open for exactly 24 more hours. I want him to feel safe. And then we will pull the rug out from under the entire charade. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of diamonds and designer silk. Julian had spared no expense for this engagement party because he was not spending his own money. He was spending the future he believed he had secured. 500 of New York's elite were sipping vintage champagne that cost more per bottle than my father had earned in a month. Julian stood at the center of the room in a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, holding court with the Kensington family. He looked like a prince who had finally ascended to the throne. He laughed at Mr. Kensington's jokes and kissed Mrs. Kensington's cheek and held Chloe's hand as if she were a prize he had won at a carnival. I watched it all from the shadows of the mezzanine. I was not wearing the muddy rags I had left in. I was wearing a floor-length gown of liquid gold silk that moved like water against my skin. My hair was pulled back, revealing diamond earrings that caught the light of the chandeliers. I did not look like a discard. I looked like a queen coming to inspect her kingdom. Mr. Archibald stood beside me, checking his watch. He gave me a subtle nod. It was time. I descended the grand staircase. The sound of my heels on the marble was rhythmic and deliberate. At first, only a few people noticed. Then the whispers started. They rippled through the crowd like a wave until the entire ballroom fell silent. The jazz band faltered and stopped. Julian turned around, annoyed by the interruption. When he saw me, the blood drained from his face so fast, I thought he might faint. He dropped Chloe's hand as if it burned him. Zara. He whispered the name, escaping his lips like a curse. I reached the bottom of the stairs and walked straight toward them. The crowd parted for me, sensing that something dangerous was walking in their midst. I stopped 3 feet from the happy couple. Hello, Julian, I said, my voice projecting clearly in the silent room. Hello, Chloe. I hope I am not late for the toast. Mrs. Kensington stepped forward. She was a woman who wore her prejudice like a pearl necklace, ostentatious and cold. She looked me up and down with a sneer that had withered board members and senators. How did you get in here? She asked, her voice dripping with disdain. The service entrance is around the back. If you are here to beg for alimony, you can wait in the kitchen with the other staff. A few people in the crowd tittered nervously. Julian regained his composure, feeding off her arrogance. You heard her, Zara, Julian said, stepping forward aggressively. You are trespassing. This is a private event for the Kensingtons and their peers. You do not belong here. You never did. He turned to the side and waved his hand. Security, he shouted. Remove this woman immediately. She is harassing my guests. Two large security guards in black suits stepped out from the edges of the room. They walked toward us with purpose. Julian smiled a smug, satisfied expression that made my stomach turn. He thought he had won again. He thought power was about who could shout the loudest. The guards walked right past me. They stopped in front of Julian and crossed their arms. Julian blinked, confused. What are you doing? He demanded. I said remove her. The general manager of the plaza, a man named Mr. Henderson, who had been briefed by Sterling Bank's board just 2 hours ago, stepped into the circle. He bowed slightly to me. Good evening, Miss King, Henderson said warmly. Is everything to your satisfaction? It is lovely. Thank you, Henry, I replied. Julian looked as if he had been slapped. Henry? Julian sputtered. You know him? Why are you talking to her? I am the one paying for this party. Henderson turned to Julian. His warmth evaporated, instantly replaced by the icy professionalism of a man dealing with a nuisance. Actually, Mr. Thorne, that brings us to a regrettable issue. There has been a complication with the payment for the venue and the catering. Julian laughed nervously, looking at Mr. Kensington. Complication? Do not be ridiculous. I put a deposit down weeks ago. The initial authorization was merely a hold. Henderson explained, his voice loud enough for the first 3 rows of guests to hear. We require full settlement before the main course is served. It is standard policy for accounts with volatile credit histories. We attempted to run your card on file 10 minutes ago for the balance of $250,000. Julian scoffed and reached into his tuxedo jacket. He pulled out his platinum credit card, the one he flashed at every dinner to prove his worth. Your machine must be broken, Julian said arrogantly, thrusting the card at Henderson. Run it again, and then bring me a bottle of your best scotch for the inconvenience. Henderson took the card. He signaled to a waiter who brought over a portable card terminal on a silver tray. The entire room leaned in. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the beep of the machine as the card was inserted. Julian tapped his foot impatiently, smiling at Chloe. It is just a glitch, babe, he said to her. Banks make mistakes all the time. The machine beeped, a long, harsh dissonant sound. Henderson looked at the screen. Declined, he announced. Julian's smile faltered. Try it again, he snapped. Henderson did. Beep. Declined. Code 51, Henderson said. Insufficient funds. And card issuer reclamation order. He did not hand the card back to Julian. He placed it in his own pocket. That is my card. Julian shouted, panic rising in his voice. Give it back. I am afraid I cannot do that, Sir Henderson said calmly. The bank has ordered it confiscated. Do you have another form of payment? Julian patted his pockets frantically. He pulled out a second card. Use this one. Beep. Declined. A third card. Beep. Declined. Sweat was now pouring down Julian's face. He looked like a trapped animal. He looked at me, and for the first time he saw the phone in my hand. I was typing a message to the credit department at Sterling Bank. Every time he produced a card, I sent a code. Every asset he had was being frozen in real time. This is impossible, Julian stammered. I am a partner at Thorne and Associates. I have millions in assets. You have millions in debt, Julian, I said softly. He spun around to face me. You, he hissed. You are doing this. I am not doing anything, I said, raising my hands innocently. I am just a guest. But it seems embarrassing to host a party you cannot pay for. Mrs. Kensington looked at Julian as if he were a cockroach. Julian, she said, her voice sharp as a razor. Fix this. Now. I. Julian looked around the room. 500 faces stared back at him with judgment and pity. He had no money. He had no credit. He had been stripped bare in the most public way possible. He turned to the only person left. He turned to Arthur Kensington, Chloe's father. "Arthur Julian," said, his voice breaking. "There has been a mistake with the bank. A security freeze or something. I will sort it out tomorrow morning. I swear. Can you cover the balance for tonight? I will wire it to you first thing." Arthur Kensington was a man who valued strength and despised weakness. He looked at the man who was about to marry his daughter begging for money at his own engagement party. The disgust on his face was absolute. He pulled out his own black card and handed it to Henderson without looking at Julian. "Pay the bill," Arthur said coldly, "and add 20% for the staff. They should not have to deal with this incompetence." Julian tried to laugh it off, tried to touch Arthur's shoulder. "Thanks, Arthur. You know how banks are." "Don't touch me," Arthur snapped. "We will talk about this later." The music started up again, but the mood was dead. The illusion of Julian Thorne, the golden boy, was shattered. He stood there red-faced and trembling, while Chloe refused to look at him. I walked up to Julian one last time. I leaned in close so only he could hear. "You wanted the Kensingtons, Julian. Now you are in their debt. I hope you enjoy being owned by them, because you just lost the only person who ever loved you for free." I turned and walked away, my gold dress flowing behind me like a victory banner. As I exited the ballroom, I heard Julian shouting at a waiter trying to regain some shred of dignity. But it was too late. The sharks were circling, and I had just poured blood into the water. The morning after the disaster at the plaza, Julian walked into the main branch of Sterling Bank, looking like a man who was trying very hard to hold a crumbling building together with Scotch tape. He was wearing a fresh suit, and his hair was perfectly gelled, but from my vantage point behind the one-way mirror of the executive observation deck, I could see the tremors in his hands. He needed $10 million. He needed it today. The hole in the Kensington Trust Fund he had been raiding was about to be audited, and if he did not replace the capital before the wedding, he would be trading his tuxedo for an orange jumpsuit. I sat in the leather chair, sipping an espresso, my eyes fixed on the monitor that showed the lobby in high definition. Mr. Archibald stood next to me, holding a walkie-talkie. "He is approaching the VIP desk," Ma'am Archibald said. "He is demanding to see the Senior Vice President of Lending immediately." I pressed the button on the microphone that fed directly into the earpiece of the young man sitting at the front desk. His name was Marcus, a junior associate I had personally selected for this task, because he had a face of stone. "Make him wait," I said softly into the mic. "Tell him the system is updating. And Marcus, turn off the air conditioning in the VIP waiting room. Let us see him sweat." I watched as Marcus nodded imperceptibly. He said something to Julian, who immediately slammed his hand on the counter. Julian pointed at his watch. He shouted something about being a partner. Marcus did not flinch. He simply gestured to the glass-walled waiting area. Julian marched into the room and sat down. For the first hour, he checked his phone every 30 seconds. He made angry calls that went to voicemail. I knew who he was calling. He was calling me. He was calling his lawyer. He was calling loan sharks. No one was answering. By the second hour, the heat began to rise. The ventilation in that small glass box had been cut. Julian loosened his tie. He wiped his forehead with a silk handkerchief. He paced back and forth like a caged tiger. "Let him stew for another hour," I instructed. "If he asks for water, give him a cup that is slightly leaking." It was petty, it was cruel, and it was exactly what he deserved. He had made me wait for years. He had made me wait for affection, for respect, for honesty. Now he could wait for money. 5 hours passed. Julian looked wrecked. His shirt was damp. His patience was ash. Finally, I gave the signal. "Send him in to see Mr. Henderson. But not in the corner office. Use the basement archive room. The one with the flickering light." Julian was led downstairs. He looked confused, offended that he was being taken away from the plush offices upstairs. He sat down at a metal table across from Mr. Henderson, who had a stack of files a foot high. I need a bridge loan. Julian started, his voice hoarse. 10 million. Short term. I have the assets. I have the Kensington merger coming up. It is a formality. Just sign the check, Henderson. I do not have all day. I spoke into Henderson's earpiece. Ask for his tax returns from 2015 and his elementary school report card. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses. We would love to help you, Mr. Thorne. However, due to new compliance regulations, we need to update your file. We need your tax returns from 8 years ago. Julian stared at him. Are you joking? I have been banking here for a decade. My credit score is 800. Standard procedure, Henderson said flatly. Also, we need a handwritten list of every asset you intend to use as collateral, notarized by 3 independent witnesses. Julian exploded. This is harassment. Do you know who my fiancé is? I am marrying Chloe Kensington. Henderson looked down at his papers. Yes, we are aware. However, marriage is a volatile asset class. We need hard collateral. Please fill out these forms. He pushed a stack of papers toward Julian. The printer is broken, Henderson added. You will have to fill them out in triplicate, by hand. I watched Julian scribble furiously for 45 minutes. His hand was cramping. He was muttering curses under his breath. He was so desperate for that money that he would have signed a confession if we put it in front of him. Finally, he threw the pen down. Done. Now give me the money. I leaned into the microphone. This was the moment, the kill shot. Deny him, I whispered. Tell him why. Henderson picked up the papers. He looked them over slowly, taking his time while Julian hyperventilated. Then Henderson closed the folder. I am afraid we cannot approve this loan, Mr. Thorne. Julian stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the concrete floor. What? Why, my financials are perfect. I have the income. It is not a matter of income, Sir Henderson said, his voice devoid of sympathy. It is a matter of our new risk assessment algorithm. Specifically, the character clause. Character clause? Julian sputtered. What the hell is that? We have recently reviewed your transaction history, Henderson said. We found disturbing patterns. Unauthorized withdrawals from client accounts, gambling debts masked as business expenses, and a recent attempt to defraud a luxury hotel venue. Sterling Bank does not partner with high-risk individuals. You cannot do this, Julian screamed. I will sue you. I will pull every account I have. I will bury this bank. You have no accounts to pull, Julian, I said into the microphone, my voice overriding Henderson's earpiece and broadcasting directly into the room's speaker system. Julian froze. He looked up at the ceiling at the speaker. He knew that voice. Zara, he whispered. Hello, Julian. Where are you? He shouted, spinning around. What is going on? I am the risk assessment algorithm, Julian, I said, and you have failed. You are a bad investment. You are a liability. And effective immediately, Sterling Bank is calling in all your existing personal loans. You have 24 hours to pay back the mortgage on your penthouse and the lease on your car, or we will begin seizure proceedings. No, Julian gasped, sinking back into the metal chair. You cannot be doing this. You are nobody. You are a janitor's daughter. I am the owner of this bank, Julian. The silence in the basement room was heavy and suffocating. My father did not just leave me a card, I continued. He left me the ledger. He left me the controlling interest. I own the chair you are sitting in. I own the mortgage on the roof over your head. And I am denying your loan not because you are broke, but because you are morally bankrupt. Security escort Mr. Thorne out of the building, and make sure he takes the stairs. I watched on the monitor as 2 guards lifted Julian out of the chair. He did not fight. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. He looked small. As they dragged him out the back exit into the alleyway, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't joy. It was relief. The man who had terrorized me with his success, who had made me feel small for 7 years, was gone. In his place was just a desperate man with a mountain of debt and a wedding he could not pay for. I turned off the microphone. "Mr. Archibald," I said, standing up and smoothing my dress. "Yes, ma'am. Send a bottle of champagne to the Kensington estate, with a note. Tell them Sterling Bank advises them to audit their family trust immediately." Archibald smiled. "A very wise move, ma'am." "It is not business," I said, walking toward the door. "It is a public service announcement. Now let's go. I have an auction to attend, and I hear there is a painting Julian is desperate to buy." The charity auction was held in a glass-walled atrium that smelled of white lilies and old money. It was the kind of event where philanthropy was just a tax write-off and a costume party for the elite. The Kensingtons were seated in the front row naturally, Mrs. Kensington was wearing a diamond choker that looked tight enough to restrict oxygen to her brain, and Chloe was draped over Julian's arm, whispering in his ear. They looked like royalty. Julian looked like a man who had forgotten that the guillotine was waiting outside. I stood at the back near the champagne tower. I was not hiding. I was waiting. Mr. Archibald stood a few feet away, holding a secure tablet that monitored the real-time credit inquiries of every person in the room. He just applied for a short-term high-interest loan from a private equity firm in the Cayman Islands, Archibald murmured without looking at me. "The interest rate is 40%. He is desperate to buy his way back into Arthur Kensington's good graces after the disaster at the plaza." "Let him borrow it," I said, taking a sip of sparkling water. "Let him borrow every cent." The auctioneer, a British man with a voice like velvet, stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the highlight of the evening. Lot 42. The Warrior's Return. A rare 18th century artifact from the Benin Empire. This piece signifies strength, heritage, and the unbroken spirit of kings." Two handlers brought out a stunning bronze statue. It was magnificent, it was powerful, and it was exactly the kind of prop the Kensingtons wanted to put in their foyer to show how culturally aware they were, despite never having set foot on the continent. Mrs. Kensington leaned over to Julian. I could read her lips perfectly. "Get it for me. Arthur is still angry about the engagement party bill. Fix this." Julian nodded, sweating slightly. He raised his paddle. "We will start the bidding at $100,000, the auctioneer announced. Julian's paddle shot up. $100,000 from Mr. Thorne. $150, a voice called out from the back. Julian turned around. The entire room turned. I stepped out of the shadows, raising my paddle. It was number 001, the owner's paddle. $200,000, Julian shouted, glaring at me. He looked furious. He looked terrified. He thought I was broke. He thought I was bluffing. $300,000, I said calmly. Chloe stood up, her face flushed with indignation. She marched over to me, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor. "What do you think you are doing?" she hissed. "You cannot afford a cab ride, let alone a piece of history. Stop embarrassing yourself. Julian is going to buy this for my mother. Do not ruin this." I looked at Chloe. I looked at the bronze warrior. "It is funny, Chloe," I said, my voice low. "You want this statue to decorate your house. My ancestors died to protect it. I think I have a better claim." $400,000, Julian yelled from the front row. His voice cracked. $500,000, I countered without blinking. The room was buzzing. This was not an auction anymore. It was a blood sport. Julian was checking his phone frantically. I knew what he was seeing. The loan approval had just come through. He had access to $2 million of dirty money that would cost him his soul to repay. He felt invincible again. $600,000, Julian bid. $700, I replied. 8. 9. $1 million. Julian screamed, standing up. He looked wild. He looked manic. He turned to Arthur Kensington, looking for approval. Arthur gave him a curt nod. That was all the fuel Julian needed. $1.2 million, I said. Julian laughed. It was a jagged, ugly sound. "You do not have the money, Zara," he shouted across the room. "You are driving up the price with imaginary funds. Security should throw you out." The auctioneer looked at me nervously. "Miss King?" I looked at Mr. Archibald. He stepped forward and whispered something to the auctioneer. The auctioneer turned pale, nodded, and banged his gavel. "The bid stands at 1.2 million from Miss King. Her credit is unlimited." Julian's jaw dropped. The Kensingtons looked confused. Unlimited. A janitor's daughter. 1.5 million, Julian choked out. He was shaking. He was gambling everything on this. He believed that if he won this statue, if he handed it to Arthur Kensington, all his sins would be forgiven. He believed it was his ticket back to the high table. 1.8 million, I said. The room was silent. People were holding their breath. This was 10 times the estimated value of the piece. It was insanity. $2 million, Julian roared. He held his paddle up with both hands like a weapon. $2 million. He looked at me, his eyes bulging, daring me to go higher. He wanted me to bid. He needed me to bid so he could drop out and stick me with the bill, or he needed to win to prove he was the big man. He was trapped in a loop of his own ego. I looked at the statue. It was beautiful. But it was just a thing, and Julian was about to sell his life for it. I lowered my paddle. I smiled at Julian, a soft, gentle smile. "It is all yours, Julian," I said. "Congratulations." The auctioneer paused. He looked at me, waiting. "Going once," he said. Julian looked around, panic suddenly replacing his adrenaline. He realized I had stopped. He realized he had just committed $2 million he had borrowed at 40% interest for a statue worth maybe $200,000. Going twice. Julian looked at Arthur Kensington. Arthur was not smiling. Arthur was doing the math. Arthur knew a bad deal when he saw one. Sold to Mr. Julian Thorne for $2 million. The gavel banged. The sound was final. Julian collapsed into his chair. He did not look triumphant. He looked like a man who had just swallowed poison. A handler walked over to him with a mobile payment terminal. "Mr. Thorne, we require immediate settlement for amounts over 1 million, the handler said. Julian fumbled for his phone. He initiated the transfer from the offshore account. I watched the transaction on my tablet via Mr. Archibald's feed. The money moved. The debt was sealed. He now owed a violent loan shark $2 million plus interest due in 30 days. I walked over to the Kensington table. Mrs. Kensington was looking at the statue with a mixture of greed and horror at the price. "Enjoy the art," I said to her. "It cost him everything he has, and everything he does not have." Julian looked up at me. His face was gray. "Why?" he whispered. "Why are you doing this?" I leaned down. "Because you forgot where you came from, Julian. And you forgot who helped you get there. You wanted to play with the big money. Now you are drowning in it." I straightened up and signaled to Archibald. "Cancel his validation for parking," I said loud enough for Chloe to hear. "If he can afford a $2 million statue, he can pay $40 for the garage." I walked out of the atrium into the cool night air. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the bank's internal system. Julian's transfer had triggered a suspicious activity report because of the source of the funds. The FBI would be notified automatically within the hour. The game was entering the final phase. Julian had the statue. The Kensingtons had their prop. But the bill was coming due, and nobody in that family knew how to pay for anything other than appearances. The glass walls of the forensic accounting department at Sterling Bank were soundproof, but the tension inside was loud enough to hear. It was 3 a.m. I was not tired. Adrenaline is a powerful fuel, especially when mixed with the cold clarify of justice. Mr. Archibald stood by the main monitor, his face illuminated by the cascading streams of data. Beside him sat a young woman named Mia. She was Julian's former executive assistant, the one he had fired 2 months ago for bringing him the wrong latte on a Tuesday. Mia looked terrified, but when she looked at me, she saw something other than a vengeful ex-wife. She saw a woman who had the power to right the wrongs done to people like us. People who were treated as disposable by men like Julian. He kept a second ledger on a private server, Mia said, her voice trembling slightly. He thought he was being clever encrypting it. But he used his birthday as the password. He always was a narcissist. I watched as the head of my cybersecurity team typed in the date. The screen flashed green. Access granted. Suddenly, the real financial life of Julian Thorne spilled out like a gutted fish. It was not just bad, it was catastrophic. I leaned in closer, my eyes scanning the columns. I saw transfers, massive ones, 500,000, 2 million, another 3 million, all leaving the accounts labeled Kensington Family Trust. Where did this money go? Archibald asked, his voice hushed. The security chief tapped a few keys, tracing the digital footprint. It went into a high-risk cryptocurrency exchange in the Bahamas. He was betting on altcoins. He was trying to double the money before the wedding so he could pay off his personal debts and look like a genius. And the current value, I asked. The chief grimaced. 0.04 cents. It crashed last week. He lost it all. Every dime of Chloe's inheritance, every penny of Arthur Kensington's retirement fund. The silence in the room was heavy. Julian was not just a cheater. He was a thief. He had stolen from the very people he was desperate to impress. He had gutted the family fortune of the woman he was about to marry to fund a gambling addiction disguised as investment strategy. I looked at the clock. It was morning. Julian would be getting his morning coffee at the small cafe near his old office, the one he went to when he wanted to feel like a man of the people before heading to his ivory tower. I stood up. Print it, I said. All of it. Every transaction, every loss, every lie. An hour later, I walked into the cafe. It smelled of roasted beans and stale pastries. Julian was there, sitting in the back corner, aggressively typing on his phone. He looked haggard. The stress of the auction debt was eating him alive, but he was still wearing a suit that cost more than the barista made in a year. I slid into the booth opposite him. He jumped, dropping his phone. "Zara?" he hissed, looking around to see if anyone was watching. "Are you stalking me? I have a restraining order ready to file. You have nothing." "Julian," I said, placing a thick manila envelope on the table between us. He laughed, a nervous, twitchy sound. "You think winning a few auctions makes you powerful? You are just new money, Zara. You do not understand how this world works. The Kensingtons protect their own. I am marrying Chloe in 2 days. Once that ring is on her finger, I am untouchable." I tapped the envelope. "The Kensingtons protect their own," I repeated. "That is true, but how do you think they treat the help who steals the silver?" Julian frowned. "What are you talking about? I am talking about the Kensington Family Trust. I am talking about the $5 million you siphoned off to buy Dogecoin and other digital trash. I am talking about the fact that you drained your fiancé's future to pay for your past." Julian's face went the color of ash. He reached for the envelope, but I put my hand over it. "How?" he whispered. "How do you know?" "Because I own the bank where you laundered the money, Julian. I see everything." He slumped back against the vinyl seat. He looked small. He looked like the insecure boy I had met 10 years ago, the one who thought money was the only way to get respect. "Please," he choked out. "Please, Zara. If Arthur finds out, he will kill me. Not legally. He will destroy me. I can fix this. I just need time. After the wedding, I can move some assets." "There are no assets," I said, cutting him off. "There is only a hole. A deep black hole that you dug yourself." I stood up, picking up the envelope. I did not give it to him. This was my ammunition. "You think I am doing this for revenge?" I said, looking down at him. "No, Julian. Revenge is emotional. This is a transaction. You took 7 years of my life. You took my dignity. You took my home. Now I am taking your mask." I walked to the door. "Where are you going?" Julian shouted, standing up and knocking over his coffee. "To the Kensingtons," I said without looking back. "They hate thieves, Julian. Especially the ones they invited to dinner." I stepped out onto the street. The sun was shining. The city was waking up. I held the file against my chest. It felt heavy, but it was a good weight, the weight of truth. The weight of consequences. I hailed a cab. Take me to the Kensington estate, I told the driver. And hurry. It is time to end the game. The Kensington estate looked like a page torn from a fairy tale book that cost $50 million to print. White orchids covered every surface from the archway to the chairs. The Atlantic Ocean crashed rhythmically against the cliffs below, providing a soundtrack that no amount of money could buy. But the Kensingtons had certainly tried. 500 guests sat in silent anticipation. These were not just friends, they were senators and oil tycoons and tech moguls. They were the people Julian Thorne had spent his entire life trying to impress. Julian stood at the altar in a tuxedo that was likely paid for with stolen funds. He looked triumphant. The sweat that had plagued him for the last week was gone, replaced by the cool arrogance of a man who believes he has outrun the avalanche. He watched Chloe walk down the aisle. She looked like a diamond statue, cold and expensive. Her dress was a custom creation from Paris with a train so long it required 3 assistants to manage. I watched from the back behind the heavy oak doors of the main entrance. I was not alone. Flanking me were 6 federal agents in windbreakers that said FBI, and 4 lawyers from Sterling Bank carrying briefcases that contained the end of Julian's life. Mr. Archibald checked his watch. "The timing must be precise, ma'am," he whispered. "We need the ceremony to begin so the fraud is consummated. If he signs the marriage license while concealing his debts, it adds another layer to the indictment." I nodded. My heart was not racing. It was beating with the slow, steady rhythm of a judge's gavel. We waited. The music swelled. Chloe reached the altar. Arthur Kensington placed her hand in Julian's. They looked like the perfect merger. The priest began to speak. He talked about love and honor and truth. It was ironic considering the groom was a thief and the bride's family was broke but hiding it behind rented flowers. Then came the moment, the silence before the storm. "If anyone here has just cause why these two may not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." The priest paused. The seagulls cried out over the ocean. Julian smiled a small, tight smile of relief. He thought he had made it. He thought the finish line was crossed. I pushed the doors open. They hit the walls with a sound like a thunderclap that echoed through the silent garden. "I object," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried. 500 heads turned. The gasp was collective, a sudden intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the air. Julian froze. His face went from triumphant to gray in a single heartbeat. Chloe whipped around her veil, tangling. When she saw me, her face twisted into a mask of pure fury. "You!" she shrieked. "Get her out of here! Security, Daddy, get her out!" Arthur Kensington stepped forward, his face purple with rage. "You have some nerve showing your face here," he shouted. "This is private property. You are trespassing." I walked down the aisle. I did not walk alone. The agents and lawyers fell in step behind me, a phalanx of justice marching toward the altar. The guests parted nervously, shrinking away from the badges and the guns. "I am not trespassing, Arthur," I said calmly, stopping 10 feet from the altar. "And I am not here because I want your daughter's fiancé. You can keep him. I am here because I own him." "What are you talking about?" Chloe spat. "You are delusional. You are just a jealous ex-wife who cannot accept that Julian upgraded." I looked at Julian. He was shaking. He knew. He looked at the agents behind me and he knew the game was over. "Tell them, Julian," I said. "Tell them who paid for the ring on Chloe's finger. Tell them who paid for the deposit on this venue. Tell them whose money is in your offshore accounts." Julian tried to speak, but only a strangled noise came out. "He cannot tell you," I continued, turning to the crowd. "So I will. My name is Zara King. I am the majority shareholder and owner of Sterling Bank." A murmur went through the crowd. Sterling Bank was legendary. It was old money. It was power. "Mr. Thorne here has been embezzling from his clients for 3 years, I said, my voice steady, "including the Kensington Family Trust. He stole $5 million from his future father-in-law to pay off gambling debts, and buy his way into this society. Liar. Arthur Kensington roared. Julian handles my accounts personally. He has tripled our returns. He forged the statements, Arthur, I said. He showed you screenshots of a fantasy. The money is gone. He bet it all on cryptocurrency schemes that collapsed last week. Your trust fund is empty. Arthur looked at Julian. He looked at the man he had welcomed into his home. Julian, tell her she is lying, Arthur demanded, his voice trembling. Julian looked at the floor. I can fix it, Arthur. I just need time. The market will bounce back. I have a system. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a dynasty crumbling. But that is not why I am interrupting the wedding, I said, signaling to the lead agent. I am here as the primary creditor. You see, Julian used this estate, the Kensington estate, as collateral for a bridge loan he took out 3 days ago to cover his tracks. He forged Arthur's signature as a cosigner. Arthur grabbed his chest, swaying slightly. And since the loan was fraudulent and immediately defaulted due to the criminal investigation, I called in the debt this morning, I said. I pulled a document from the folder Archibald handed me. This is a writ of seizure. As the owner of the note, I am exercising my right to immediate foreclosure. Foreclosure! Chloe screamed. This is my wedding day. You cannot foreclose on a wedding. Actually, I can, I said, cold as ice. Everything on this property that was paid for with stolen funds is now evidence. The flowers, the catering, the sound system. I looked at Chloe's hand, and the ring. The lead FBI agent stepped forward. Julian Thorne, you are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. Julian tried to run. It was a pathetic instinct. He took 2 steps toward the cliff edge before he realized there was nowhere to go. He stopped, slumping his shoulders. The agents moved in. They pulled his arms behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was loud enough to be heard in the back row. Chloe stood there alone at the altar. She looked at Julian being manhandled. She looked at her father, who had collapsed into a chair, gasping for air. She looked at her mother, who was frantically trying to hide her face from the guests who were now holding up their phones, recording everything. This is a nightmare, Chloe sobbed. This cannot be happening. It is reality, Chloe, I said. You wanted a man who would do anything to be rich. You got him. I turned to the crowd. I apologize for the inconvenience, ladies and gentlemen. But this event has been canceled by the management. The property is now under the control of Sterling Bank. Please make your way to the exits in an orderly fashion. The caterers have been instructed to pack up the food as it is now considered asset recovery. The chaos that erupted was total. Guests were running for their cars trying to escape the scandal. Waiters were freezing, looking terrified. The band had stopped playing and was packing up their instruments. I walked up to the altar where Julian stood in cuffs. He looked at me with tears streaming down his face. Zara, please, he begged. I did it for us. In the beginning, I did it for us. I wanted to give you the world. Don't lie to me, Julian, not at the end, I said. You did it for you. You did it because you were small and you wanted to feel big. I looked at the Kensington family. They were broken. Their secrets were out. Their money was gone. Their reputation was destroyed. Arthur, I said, looking down at the man who had sneered at me just days ago. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. My team will be here tomorrow at 8 a.m. to change the locks. I suggest you start packing. I turned and walked back down the aisle. I did not look back. I could hear Chloe screaming at Julian. I could hear the sirens approaching in the distance. I walked past the white orchids and the silk ribbons. I walked past the stunned faces of the elite. I walked out of the fairy tale and back into the real world. The rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds. It was a beautiful day for a foreclosure. The massive LED screen behind the altar was supposed to play a montage of Julian and Chloe's courtship set to a string quartet melody. It was meant to show vacations in the south of France and ski trips to Aspen and moments of curated perfection that would make the guests envy their love. Instead, with a nod from me to Archibald, the screen flickered and turned a stark, blinding white. The romantic music cut out, replaced by the hum of the cooling fans on the display. Rows of numbers appeared. They were not random. They were bank statements. Specifically, they were the statements for the Kensington Family Trust. The font was large enough for the guests in the back row to read without their reading glasses. The columns were red, deep blood red. I stepped to the side so the audience could have a clear view. "Arthur," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence like a knife. "You asked for proof. Here it is." The screen scrolled. It showed wire transfers. $500,000 on March 3rd, sent to an offshore gambling site. $2 million on April 10th, sent to a cryptocurrency exchange that had been flagged for fraud by the SEC. Another $1 million on May 1st, withdrawn as cash. The crowd gasped. It was a collective sound of shock that rippled through the garden. These were people who understood money. They understood ledgers, and they understood what it looked like when a fortune was being bled dry. Arthur Kensington stood up. He was a man who prided himself on control, on seeing the angles before anyone else. But he was staring at his own financial ruin broadcast on a 20-foot screen. He took a step toward Julian, his hand reaching out as if to grab him by the throat, but his legs would not cooperate. He stumbled. His face turned a terrifying shade of gray. His hand went to his chest, clutching the lapel of his expensive suit. Daddy, Chloe screamed. Arthur collapsed back into his chair, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. It was not a fatal blow, but it was the physical manifestation of a broken heart. He was watching his legacy evaporate. He was realizing that the man he had welcomed into his home, the man he had treated like the son he never had, was a parasite who had been feeding on him for years. Mrs. Kensington was fanning him frantically, screaming for a doctor. But her eyes were not on her husband. They were on the screen. She was watching the numbers scroll. She was watching her social standing, her vacations, her jewelry, her entire identity disappear into the red ink. "Julian, you did this?" Mrs. Kensington shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. "You told us the accounts were frozen for the merger. You told us the returns were delayed. You lied to us. You dirty little thief." Julian was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face mixed with sweat. "It was just a bridge loan," he babbled, his voice high and hysterical. "I was going to put it back. The market was going to turn. I just needed a few more days." "There is no market, Julian," I said calmly. "You were not investing, you were gambling, and the house always wins." But I was not done. There was one more layer to peel back. One more humiliation to deliver to the woman who had sneered at my father's profession. I turned to Chloe. She was standing over her father, looking lost and terrified. She was holding her left hand against her chest, protecting the massive diamond engagement ring that had been the envy of every socialite in New York for the past 6 months. "Chloe," I said. She looked at me, her eyes wide with hatred. "You ruined everything," she spat. "You are jealous because he bought me a ring you could never afford." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, Chloe, do you really think a man who has to steal from his father-in-law to pay his bookie has $50,000 for a diamond?" Chloe froze. She looked down at her hand. The stone caught the sunlight, sparkling brilliantly. "Julian told you it was a flawless D-color diamond from Tiffany," I continued. "He told you he had it custom cut. He told you it was an investment." I signaled to Archibald. The screen changed again. This time it showed a credit card receipt. It was dated 6 months ago. It was from a store in the Diamond District, but not one of the high-end showrooms. It was a receipt for a high-quality cubic zirconia replica and a platinum-plated setting. Total cost $400. The crowd went silent again. This was a different kind of silence. This was the silence of social death. In their world, embezzlement was a crime, but wearing fake jewelry was a sin. "No," Chloe whispered. "No, he wouldn't." "Look at the receipt, Chloe," I said. "Look at the date. Look at the card number. It matches the corporate card he stole from his firm. He did not even pay for the fake with his own money." Chloe looked at Julian. He was not looking at her. He was looking at his shoes, unable to meet her gaze. His silence was a confession. "You bought me a fake," she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage so pure it was almost beautiful. "You stole $5 million from my father and you bought me a piece of glass." Julian looked up, his eyes pleading. "Babe, listen. I needed the cash for the venue. I needed to pay the deposit for the estate. I was going to replace it. Once the deal went through, I was going to buy you the biggest diamond in the world. I swear." Chloe let out a scream that sounded like an animal in a trap. She ripped the ring off her finger. It scratched her skin, drawing a thin line of blood, but she did not care. She wound up and threw it. The ring flew through the air, spinning in the sunlight. It hit Julian square in the face. It struck his cheekbone with a hard crack and bounced onto the stone floor with a tinny, cheap sound that confirmed everything I had said. "I hate you," Chloe screamed, lunging at him. "You are garbage. You are nothing. You made me look like a fool." The FBI agents had to step in. They held Chloe back as she tried to claw Julian's eyes out. Her wedding dress was torn. Her veil was askew. The perfect bride had become an avenging fury. Mrs. Kensington stood up, abandoning her husband, who was now being attended to by a doctor from the guest list. She pointed a shaking finger at Julian. "I want him gone," she yelled at the agents. "Get him out of my sight. He is a fraud. He tricked us. We did not know. You have to believe us. We are victims here." She was already spinning the narrative. She was already trying to save herself. She did not care about justice. She cared about being associated with a criminal. I watched them turn on each other. The family that had looked so united, so perfect just an hour ago, was now a pack of wolves tearing at their own. They were blaming Julian not because he had stolen, but because he had been caught. They were screaming not because they were hurt, but because they were embarrassed. Julian stood there, the red mark on his cheek swelling where the fake diamond had hit him. He looked at the Kensingtons. He looked at the life he had lied and stolen to get. And he realized that they did not love him. They loved what he could give them. And now that he had nothing to give, he was just trash to be taken out. He looked at me. His eyes were dead. "Are you happy now, Zara?" he asked quietly. I looked at the chaos. I looked at the ruin of the wedding of the century. "I am not happy, Julian," I said. "But I am satisfied. You wanted the truth. You wanted the real world. This is it. The truth is expensive. And you just ran out of credit." I nodded to the lead agent. "Take him," I said. The agents pulled Julian away. He did not fight this time. He dragged his feet, the expensive shoes scuffing against the stone. He passed the fake ring lying on the ground. He did not even look at it. I turned back to the screen where the evidence of his crimes was still glowing in high definition. I signaled Archibald to cut the feed. The screen went black. The show was over, but the consequences were just beginning. The FBI agents had him by the arms, but Julian fought them not to run away, but to get to me. He twisted his body with a desperation that was painful to watch and threw himself toward my feet. The man who had thrown my suitcase into the mud was now dragging his expensive tuxedo through the dirt of the Kensington garden. "Wait, please, just 1 minute," he screamed at the agents. He looked up at me. His face was a mask of snot and tears. The cameras were all around us now. Every guest who bad not fled was holding up a phone. The live stream counters were ticking up by the thousands. The world was watching the fall of Julian Thorne in real time. "Zara, baby, listen to me," Julian sobbed, clutching at the hem of my dress. "You have to understand. They made me do it. It was Arthur. It was Mrs. Kensington. They pressured me. They said I was not good enough. They said I had to prove my worth." He pointed a shaking finger at the Kensingtons who were huddled in their shame nearby. "I did it for us, Zara. I was trying to build an empire so I could come back for you. I never loved Chloe. Look at her. She is nothing compared to you. You are my wife. You are my soulmate. Please tell them to stop. You own the bank. You can drop the charges. We can run the bank together just like your father would have wanted. I looked down at him. I looked at the man I had cooked dinner for, the man I had ironed shirts for, the man I had believed in when he was nothing but a junior analyst with a cheap suit and a dream. I saw him clearly for the first time. There was no love in his eyes. There was only calculation. He was doing the math. He realized I was the new golden goose and he was trying to switch nests before the cage door slammed shut. I signaled for the agents to step back for a second. The silence in the garden was heavy. Even the seagulls seemed to stop crying to listen. You want to get back together, Julian? I asked, my voice calm and carrying over the ocean breeze. Yes, yes, baby, please, Julian cried, nodding frantically. I made a mistake. I was lost. But I am found now. I love you. I have always loved you. Let us go home. I smiled. It was the smile of a predator looking at wounded prey. That is very interesting, Julian, because there is one small detail about my father's legacy that Mr. Archibald forgot to mention during your loan application. I leaned down so our faces were inches apart. Elijah King was a genius, but he was also a paranoid man. He knew that one day a man like you might try to crawl back if he found out about the money, so he put a poison pill clause in the trust. Julian stopped crying. His eyes narrowed slightly. He was listening now. The clause states that if I ever reconcile with my ex-husband or give him access to a single penny of the King fortune, the entire trust is immediately liquidated and donated to the United Negro College Fund. Every asset, every building, every dollar, it all burns, Julian. I stood up and brushed a speck of dust from my dress. So you see, Julian, you have a choice. You can say you love me, and we can be together poor. Or you can admit that you only want the wallet you missed out on. The color drained from Julian's face. The calculation in his eyes turned to horror. He looked at me and then he looked at the FBI agents. He realized there was no winning. If he got me, he got nothing. If he lost me, he went to jail. You, he stammered, unable to find the words. I do not love you, Julian, I said, my voice ice cold. And you do not love me. You just love the reflection of yourself in a gold mirror. But the mirror is broken, and you are just a man on his knees in the dirt. I looked at the lead agent. Get him out of my sight! Julian screamed as they hauled him up. He did not scream my name. He screamed about his money. He screamed about his life. As they dragged him toward the waiting squad cars, the guests parted like the Red Sea, not out of respect but out of fear. They were not looking at Julian anymore. They were looking at me, the janitor's daughter who had just cleaned house. There is a seduction in power. It whispers that you should build walls higher than the ones you tore down. It tells you to hoard, to protect, to isolate. Julian listened to that whisper and it led him to a cell. I chose to listen to my father. He did not leave me a fortune so I could become another Kensington, looking down on the world from a high tower. He left it to me so I could build a ladder for everyone else still stuck on the ground. I did not buy a yacht. I did not buy a summer home in the Hamptons to replace the one I was thrown out of. Instead, I returned to the neighborhood where my father and I had lived in a 2-room walk-up. The building was condemned, boarded up, and forgotten just like the people who lived in its shadow. I bought the entire block. Construction crews are there right now turning the decay into the King Community Library and Tech Hub. It will be a place where kids who look like me can touch computers they do not own and read books they cannot afford. It is a place where the next generation of geniuses will not have to hide their brilliance behind a mop and bucket. I also established the Elijah King Venture Fund. It is exclusively for Black women entrepreneurs. Women who have the fire but not the funding. Women who walk into banks and get told their credit is too thin or their ideas are too risky. I sit across from them now, and I do not ask for tax returns from elementary school. I ask them what they dream about, and then I give them the check that makes it real. On the 1-year anniversary of the divorce, I stood on the sidewalk in front of the bank. It was raining again, just like that night in the Hamptons. But this time, I was not cold. I was wearing a coat I bought with my own dividends. The security guard, the same one who had tried to turn me away, saw me approaching. He did not put his hand on his holster. He rushed to open the door. I stopped him. "Not yet," I said. I looked up at the massive stone facade. For 50 years it had borne the name Sterling Bank, a monument to old money and exclusion. But today, there was a crew on ladders finishing their work. They polished the new brass lettering until it shone like a beacon in the gray city light. Elijah and Zara King Building. I looked at my father's name carved in stone, where it would remain long after I was gone. He was no longer the silent founder. He was the headline. He was the history. I walked forward. I did not go to the side entrance. I did not use the service elevator. I walked through the main revolving doors, my heels clicking a rhythm of victory on the marble floor that my father used to polish on his knees. The lobby was full. People stopped. They looked. They saw the woman who had been thrown away return as the woman who owned the world. I am not just a survivor of a bad marriage. I am not just a victim of a cruel system. I am the correction. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. The doors closed, shutting out the noise of the past. As the car began to rise, I realized I had not just taken revenge. I had taken my place. And the view from here is finally clear. The most powerful lesson here is that your value is never defined by someone else's inability to see it. Julian and the Kensingtons chased status and wealth, but they were morally bankrupt. Zara proved that true power isn't just about having money. It's about having the integrity to wield it wisely. Never surrender your financial independence to a partner, and never forget where you came from. When the world throws you into the storm, do not just survive, build a ladder for others to climb. Revenge is sweet, but living authentically and lifting your community up is the ultimate victory. If you believe in building a legacy that lifts others up while shutting the door on those who betrayed you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.